Welcome, everyone. This is In the Mix with the Mitchells. I am Toney Mitchell, and this is my beautiful wife.
Sanita Mitchell. It's like you got to think about it. Right?
No, I didn't have to think about it. I was just going to segue you into, introducing yourself. I mean, that just kind of leads into what we actually going to talk about tonight. The whole aspect of communication, making sure we communicate, we flowing in the right direction.
Yeah, I wasn't prepared for that. I'm like, is he going to say my name? What did you forget? Been together for 10 years. You forgot my name already.
No. Oh, man. See, we ain't going to go there. But, once again, we are the Perfect Family Blend. This is our show, In the Mix with the Mitchells, where our mission is to build, nurture, and keep blended families together. So today is our second show.
Yes.
Woo! So we're definitely excited. We're definitely pumped up for this show. And we got a good one, a good topic for you tonight. We're going to focus on, as I mentioned before, communication.
Woo, communication, right? So go ahead. Did you want to do our hello?
Hello.
So did you go get what I told you?
Yeah. What you said, right?
Right. So you got it.
Yeah, I think I got it. What you said, right?
Right. So are you going to get what I told you to get?
Yeah, I think I know what you said you were going to. Yeah, I got you.
Right. So a lot of times in communications, right, it's like, can you hear me now? Like the
right.
Verizon, can you hear me? Right. A lot of times we don't really hear our spouse, and we was joking about the skit, right? Because we were kind of like, how can we show how people can really think they're saying one thing and not saying another one? The only illustration, and if we had time, we would have pulled up, and it might happen another time, but we thought about if you ever saw Purple Rain and what was his name? Morris Day and his assistant, and they were trying to get Apollonia when she came in. Morris Day wanted his assistant to say a password, right? And he was like, so what's the password? And his assistant said, the password is password. He said, right. So what's the password?
Exactly.
Exactly. So is exactly the password? Right?
No. Password.
Just forget it.
Right?
So a lot of times that's how it's like within our relationships. We thinking we saying one thing, but the person is hearing another. And in the mix of going through the activity, the message gets lost. And usually frustration sits in, anger, right? Why you don't understand me? Right? I said it crystal clear, but how it comes out of your mouth and how it lands into his or her ear may be totally different, because as it leaves our mouth, a lot of things going on. Our hand gestures, right? I'm big with hand gestures. My facial expression may be saying something totally different, even though my mouth is saying one thing, my face is saying a totally different thing, right?
Right.
So for the first part of our segment, we're going to talk about communication, because we know that communication is huge, not just in marriage, but in any relationship. Communication with your children, communication, especially with the co-parent. Woo, that's huge. You got to communicate with one another. So we're going to jump right in, because we have like 5 points that we want to make. And as we know, in this radio world, everything goes quickly. So go ahead with number 1.
All right. The first topic, not the first topic, but the first point that we want to make regarding communication is include your spouse in all areas of communication. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? That means when I communicate with Sanita, I make sure I relay everything to her. There isn't anything that I don't share with Sanita. There is no, okay, I'm going to keep this to myself, or, hey, I'm just going to share this with one of my friends. Or I'm going to share this with a coworker, but I'm not going to tell Sanita. And then she gets blindsided when the very thing I don't tell her, she gets wind of it. And then it can be something that affects the marriage or affects the family as a whole. So make sure when you're communicating, don't be afraid to communicate to your spouse, whether it's good news or not so good news.
Right. So when we was preparing, I thought of this question. Like, a lot of times we'll hear questions such as, can your spouse, say for example, you leave your cell phone, like you guys rushing out of the door, in the middle of, getting ready for your day, and you walk out the door and you realize you have your spouse's phone number, your spouse's phone, and your spouse is taking your phone. Like, is that a problem? Like, for some people, that's a huge issue. It's like, you need to meet me and bring my phone back. But why? Like,
Right.
Why is it that you cannot have, your spouse cannot have your phone and you have your spouse's phone? Like, what is the real issue? Does your spouse have all your passwords to your phone? Can they access your phone? Like, is that a hindrance of privacy? A lot of times people are like, oh, this is my privacy, this is my world. But I'm not talking about your girlfriend or your boyfriend. I'm talking about your husband or your wife. Why is it that your spouse cannot have access to all aspects of your phone? Like, I go into Toney's phone, but not like, oh, I need to see what he's doing. But like, sometimes I'll be like, man, you got a lot going on your Facebook page. Like, your friends got a lot of things going on. It's not that I'm trying to see what he's doing. It's just a matter of just being comfortable. He's never really had an issue with me having, access to his phone.
Right. And then when you talk about access, and you talked about social media. So, okay, having access to your spouse's phone, do you have access to their social media accounts? Because that's one thing to look at is, okay, I might be able to, I know you got a Facebook account. Mm-hmm. I know you got a Twitter account or Instagram or whatever other social media account that you might have. Mm-hmm. Well, do you just have that one Facebook account, or do you have the Facebook account where your wife can see and it's like, oh, okay, this is the one, that she can check on me with. But then you have another Facebook account that you keep that, you don't share, with, and then that's where you have all the rest of your friends on it. Communication, making sure that you're open and transparent. That's really what that's all about. Being transparent, being open, being honest with your spouse, because that centers on trust.
Right. And just thinking about the next aspect of including your spouse in all your communications, like Kimberly Cleveland, she has the Wife University, and she said communication is huge. It is huge because when you're thinking about communicating, so for example, we're talking about a blended family dynamic. So it's very important to communicate, to make sure that when I'm communicating with the co-parents, that Toney knows. Like, it's no secret. So that's not me sending, the co-parents separate text. Like, we're all three of us are on a text message, right? And one of the co-parents is in a relationship, and we tried to make it so it's all four of us. But if that other person decides, like, hey, I don't want to include that other person, or maybe, in their relationship, they're like, hey, I don't need to be on that text message, then it just became the three of us. But as for my house, how it works in my home is Toney is on all text messages. He is on any emails. He's on any type of communication when I'm talking to the co-parents. And it's not that he's insecure. He's real insecure in his relationship. He knows where I stand with them. Like, he doesn't have any reason to be fearful that anything would happen. But we always have some scripture. The Bible says always make sure you protect your good name. So I want to protect my good name, my husband's good name, and even the co-parent. Like, we need to make sure that nobody, because sometimes miscommunication can occur by the people outside of the circle, right? Because if Joe Smo sees me talking and they like, oh, or they hear me on the phone and I'm talking to the co-parent and they happen to walk by, they be like, man, she holding this conversation with some other guy, and, where's Toney? Does he know? Like, or for example, say it's not the phone. Say you run into the co-parent like I did at the bank, and that one co-parent had lost one of their parents, and I ran into them in the bank. And how many of y'all know you're going to run into people? I mean, in that bank, I ran into like 5 different people. And at that time, I had hugged the co-parent, and I was like, how, are you doing? It's your mom. I've known him since I was in high school. And so it's like, I'm pretty close with them. So, but what if I didn't go home or call Toney and say, hey, I ran into so-and-so at the bank, and, I gave him a hug, and I told him, I asked him about his parents. But what if I didn't tell him, and then one of his friends saw him and was like, she all hugged up in the bank with some dude, because they don't know him, she hugged up, and, they had an intimate conversation, they done pulled off to the side and talked for a long time in the bank. And I never told Toney. So this kind of goes into the next point, which is ensure that your spouse, number 2, is that your spouse is never caught off guard. Man, what if Toney didn't know and somebody walks up to him like, man, I saw your wife in the bank. Because, everybody's not always happy. 1, people are not always happy about your good relationship.
Yes.
And then 2, people, can just exaggerate the truth, right? They can really add stuff to the story that wasn't even there. So that's why it's important for you to share.
Right, and a good example of this, even before Sanita and I became married, it was while we were dating. I can remember we were dating, we was out on a date one night, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, one of my exes called me on my cell phone. Now, I tried to ignore the phone call several times, and then eventually Sanita was like, why don't you just answer the phone? This person keeps calling you. It might be an emergency. While she didn't know that I knew it was my ex that was calling. And let me say this. She knew that, I had a previous ex. But mind you, I haven't heard from this ex in almost 7 months. So all of a sudden, she just out of the blue just calls while I'm on a date with Sanita. Needless to say, we had a back and forth, real quick disagreement. Me and the ex, I hung up the phone. And immediately, after I hung up the phone, I explained to Sanita, I communicated with her the situation, what was happening with the ex, the history behind it, everything. I was completely open with it to let her know, hey, there's no chance in, HE double hockey sticks that she is going to interfere with our relationship, and you have nothing to worry about. Now, what if I just, after that whole conversation, and Sanita asked me, well, who was that? Oh, don't worry about it. What if I said that? Would have went kosher? Would have been okay, for me to say, oh, don't worry about it. You don't have nothing to worry about. But by me being transparent and me being intentional and explaining the whole situation and the history, she felt a whole lot better about what just transpired.
And I'm glad you brought that point up, because a lot of times, a lot of things, the foundation has to be set before you get married. Like, you can't wait until you get married and then be like, all right, so when it comes down to the co-parent, what we going to do? Or when we come across, the exes, depending on how long, you've been married. Like, we've been married for almost 10 years now, so nobody coming up from our past talking about, hey, are you still available? But it's like, you have to lay the foundation at the beginning. So for all our single folks, all of our engaged folks that watch us and ask us questions like, well, how do you set up that, making sure that other person isn't caught off guard? And the key thing that Toney said was transparency. When an issue arises, like, nobody can give you everything that could possibly happen. Some things are going to be hands-on. You just going to have to get in. But what you have to do, the things you can do, is establish transparency. Is to establish that there's no hidden agendas. Because, see, when you are honest about the situation, honest about what is happening, then that builds the trust, right? You're building a trust. You want longevity, and it doesn't matter if, you just getting started and you're establishing a friendship. Like, even if it's a friendship, you need to be trustworthy. A friendship can only be built if it's built on trust. If I can be comfortable in sharing whatever's going on, which, for some people is difficult because it opens up vulnerability.
Right.
So do we have time to go into the next one before our break, or you want to just go ahead? Okay, so let's do one more, which is number 3. Establish clearly defined boundaries. Let's say that again. This is the B word that is okay to say. Boundaries. You cannot have any relationship without boundaries. Everything has a boundary, right? If you at work, you can only park in certain places. You can only do certain things. You got to come back in an hour. If you got an hour, you got 1 hour. That's your boundary, right? In your marriage, in your relationship, there has to be boundaries where people cannot cross. Your spouse has to have boundaries on what is allowed, what is okay, what are they comfortable with handling. For example, Toney, we established boundaries, and some boundaries are not going to be established until sometimes after something happens, because you sometimes cannot know what it is that may bother the other person until afterwards. But that's why you got to communicate. If it bothered you, then the person is not going to know that something impacted you by osmosis. You have to open your mouth and you have to say, you know what just took place bothered me.
Right.
You need to, so in one of my recommendations is, for example, for the phone calls, Toney, it bothered him that I was texting the co-parent, right? So how do I eliminate that? Toney just be included on the text messages, right? Because if he was, because I would forget. Like I had at the time I had two boys. We were working. We was in ministry. So sometimes I just would forget. So it wasn't that I was hiding anything, but just sometimes I would forget. But I wouldn't need to remember if he would be on the text message, because sometimes he would remind me. Because the co-parent would just, for example, just show up, and I forgot, and Toney's like, why is he here? Right? So he's like, he shouldn't be here on this day. Why? Because the boundaries. The only reason why he can come to the house or should be showing up is because he should be there to pick up his son on a particular day, right? So we talk about boundaries with text messages. Okay, we're not going to just have text messages. And even with getting to, how do we get to that point? A lot of people ask us, how do we get to that point of saying and getting that co-parent to accept the boundary, right?
Right.
Is, even when they forget. Like, I mean, again, this is 7 years of just constantly texting me before Toney came into the picture. So, of course, he forgot a few times, you know what I mean? But it was up to me to say, you got to remember to put Toney on this text message. I would say it to him, or I would just simply add Toney to the text message. And eventually he got on to, okay, I need to remember to put him on.
Yeah, and speaking of boundaries, I want to even go to the point of establishing boundaries with other family members and friends.
Yes.
When it comes to your marriage and when it comes to your friends. Case in point, I love my grandmother to death. My grandmother raised me, God bless her soul. She was my everything. However, I had to set the boundary with her because she would say little snide remarks here and there concerning Sanita. And,
give me an example.
Like she was, one time I was drying clothes. And I said, my grandma asked me, well, what are you doing? I said, oh, I'm drying clothes. And she said, well, your wife need to do that. That's not something you supposed to be doing. You the man in the house. You supposed to be sitting down, you work, you come home, and you just, rest. She need to be doing all the household stuff. So I had to, right then and there, I had to say, okay, Grandma, we need to talk. And we had a very lengthy discussion, and I clearly set the boundary with her in love, not in anger, not in raised voice. I did it in love and said, from this point forward, you cannot speak anything about Sanita or my marriage unless it's in love or it's in support. Mm-hmm. If you can't speak in those two different terms, I don't want to hear what you got to say. Mm-hmm. And guess what? From that moment on, she knew that I was fully invested in the marriage with Sanita. She knew that I was fully invested with her, and she knew where her boundary was when it came to speaking or saying anything concerning our marriage. Right. So from that point on, she always asked, "Well, how's Sanita doing?" She could call me too. I like to talk with her. And
yeah, she did.
So it was a total 360. But what if I didn't set that boundary with her? Mm-hmm. You know, from the very beginning. Right. What else she might have said? You know, that would have spoke. You got to be careful about who speaks in your ear and who has your ear. Because just like Sanita said, not everyone is happy for your relationship. Not everyone is happy for your family. So you got to make sure you keep certain people away and you keep certain people close.
The reason why I'm laughing is because some of the comments are, you know, boundaries with family is good for marriage, and you know, so glad we're discussing. But Ms. Montague said, "Boy, that was bold." And sometimes it is bold because it sometimes will take you out of the comfort zone. Because again, this is a grandmother, this is someone who has raised him, and sometimes with our parents, it's hard to say, "Hey, y'all are like overstepping the boundaries here," you know, but they have to know, you know, and they have to know that you mean it. And co-parents, they have to know. Now, the other part of this is the children. Hello? Yes. Children have to know boundaries. So many times we see in different groups and everything about how the children just come over and they just can wreak havoc. Like if they're coming in for visitation, they wreak havoc in the home that they're visiting because there's no boundaries, because nobody wants to offend anybody. No one wants to offend the co-parent. Nobody wants to cause any waves. But what happens is it's causing a wave and a rift in your family. So boundaries can be a way of bringing about peace. And sometimes the boundaries shift. Right? Yes. So sometimes you might be like, okay, we did it this way, it's not working, or, you know, once you establish that it's working or it is working, but now we can loosen it up just a little bit because maybe the other person has shown that they respect you, which is another word we're going to talk about, respect you enough that, hey, maybe now I don't quite need the stringentness of a particular boundary, right? So boundaries also needs to be reviewed, you know, just to make sure that it's still, you know, it may need to be tightened or it could be loosened just a little bit, but don't let go of the boundary because that's what's giving you the peace, right? And so children need boundaries because if children need boundaries because once they may buck against it, but they need it. Just like I said, we got laws. Laws can be considered boundaries, right? So that we just not out here just running them up, you know. So with our children, it's amazing how we, you know, well, she didn't let me. That one gets me. She didn't let you, the child 5. Why she didn't let you do something? The child is 8. How does the child not let you do something? The child is 16. Yes, they're bigger. And so they may be feeling the testosterone. Yeah, testosterone, right?
Testosterone.
Don't judge me on my words. But look, so maybe they smelling themselves, right? Yeah. The women, the young girls sometimes can be feeling like, oh, I can buck up against her. I'm about the same height as her. But they got to learn boundaries. I mean, I cannot stress that enough. And when they know the boundaries, either they're going to respect the boundaries, they're going to respect you because you are being consistent. And I know this because we have a 26-year-old. And the reason why the 26-year-old is not, he made a choice to not stay in our home is because we established the boundaries. This is my firstborn. This boy knows my heart. Oops, sorry. My heart is like, he's right here. Like, he knows it. Like, he can get anything just about, right? Toney be like, you know, you're such a sucker for him, right? Mm-hmm. But it was hard for me to establish the boundaries with him, to say you cannot come in my house at any given time. You cannot just come and go when you want. You can't just be here and not pay anything. Like, that was totally hard, because Toney was like, this dude is 20. You know, he's 26 now, but when we had this conversation, he's about 22. But I was just like, oh, he's just 22. You know, you remember when you was 22? And I was making excuses for him really disrespecting our rules. You know, he would bring people in when we were gone, and then we bust him in it, and he would just lie to us blatantly to our face. And it was just like, I was constantly making this, you know, excuses, right? But it was starting to impact me and Toney's relationship, because Toney was like, nah, if he's going to he's got to man up. He's got to take some responsibilities. He can't be here all day, you know, but that's communication. Right. And so once we stuck to our guns and was like, you got to follow the rules, he then decided, I'm going to go back and I'm going to go stay at my other grandma, his father's parents' house. Why? Because no real boundaries, right? So he would be able to do what he want to do, and they're asking him questions, but they're not holding him accountable, right? Boundaries. And you have to stick to it, parents. I'm telling you, you have to. And what happened? He came back to us a little bit later and was like, I should have listened to you. You know, this is after he went on and got apartments and cars and all kinds of stuff. You know, they got to live, but they got to realize the boundaries. And even though he's like, oh, I want to come back, but he know that if he comes back, that there's certain responsibilities and there's boundaries that he's going to have to submit to. And so no matter how old they are, you have to submit to the boundaries. Somebody said, how about I don't like her because she makes me do homework? Yeah, I mean, again, that's tough. I mean, right, Ms. Montague, you got to be able to hold people accountable, even if they don't like you because you're making them do homework. Guess what? You don't like to go to work every day either, right? It's freezing cold. You'd rather be home. You'd rather keep your slippers on and your robe and just stay home. But if you stay home, the consequences are, you know, after a while, if you don't go back to work, you fired.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
You don't go to work. That means you don't get to pay the mortgage that's keeping the roof over your head. You don't get to pay the bills. You get to enjoy all the Wi-Fi. Mm-hmm. You flip the lights on, the lights come on. The water, you turn the faucet, the water comes out. Hey, it's not fun being an adult, but you know we got that boundary. I got that boundary of, hey, if I don't go to work, the family is not being taken care of.
Absolutely.
So we all are adults here, and we have to make sure our children are not going to die if we set boundaries for them.
Right.
It's only going to help them. The Bible says, spare the rod, you spoil the child.
Right.
So
boundaries.
You got to set the boundaries. You got to let them know this is your breaking point. You get to this point, it's no return. So you have to establish that early. And when you set the boundaries, even though you might not be on the same page with each other, don't let your child see that you're not on the same page. Because once they see you're not on the same page, they know which one they can lean on and really play.
Yes, and they will play you like a fiddle. The kids will, no matter how old they are. So I have a daycare. Don't let the little cute ones, the little 6, 7, 8, 9-month-olds play you either. They can learn boundaries before they're 1. So with that, we're going to take our first commercial break, and we'll be right back with number 4.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, George. How you doing?
Hey, George.
Download the app today on your Android device to listen in and view programs.
We here at Vox Wave believe that no one in the DMV should go without a coat this winter. So we partnered with Star Imports dealership for this year's annual coat drive. If you have an old or gently used coat that can still be worn, drop it off with us. Vox Wave Studios at 4711 Off Place, Suitland, Maryland, and give the gift of warmth to somebody in need in the DMV.
Welcome back to In the Mix with the Mitchells. So before we jump back in, we want to give you the phone number just in case you want to call in with some questions or comments. The number is 240-719-2560. Again, 240-719-2560. So communication. It is impossible to get everything that you can do, tips and everything within an hour, but we're doing the best we can. We've so far given you 3.
Yes.
I'm going to tell them the 3 just in case
just
you
to recap the first 3. We said the first one was include your spouse in all communications, all levels of communication. Verbal, nonverbal, whatever other means of communication you have, involve your spouse in it. Number 2, ensure your spouse is never caught off guard. That is the worst thing that you could do to your spouse, is not tell your spouse something and then they find out and they're totally caught off guard, and that causes friction within your marriage. Mm-hmm. And then number 3, establish clearly defined boundaries. You gotta set boundaries. You gotta set boundaries for your marriage, set boundaries for your children, set boundaries for your co-parents, set boundaries for your family, friends. Just set healthy, clear, defined, understood boundaries.
Okay, someone asked for the number again. It's 240-719-2560. So, okay. It's 240-719-2560. Okay. So number 4, monitor conversations with the co-parents. No negative talk.
Okay, so I'm going to start off with this one. Because for me, it was a growing process in communicating with one of the co-parents. And when I say it was a growing process, that means when it says no negative talk, that was basically all that I said about this one particular co-parent. It was nothing positive. It was all negative. I mean, I never did it in front of the children, but I would say negative comments to Sanita, and I would sometimes say those negative comments to him. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't even a comment. It was just by nonverbal communication with him. When he comes to the door, rings the doorbell, I will look and say, hey, such and such, he'll be out. And I would close the door in front of him. Eventually, he was able to come inside the house and stand in the foyer. And I was like, just stand
Making
right
progress.
here. Making progress.
Right.
Just stand right here. He'll be down. And, eventually it kind of moved to a little small talk here and there. But mind you, Sanita and I, we've been together 10 years, been married 9, going on 10. And it took to this point for me to finally start talking positive to the co-parent. Mm-hmm. So that just goes to show you there's no time frame, there's no quick fix and everything. And when it comes to the monitor the conversation, you first have to monitor and check yourself.
Say that again.
You have to monitor and check yourself. Take your feelings out of the situation. Take your feelings out of the level of communication, because when you think about it, what you say, your words have power. Mm-hmm. So the things I was saying about this co-parent, it just, I should have spoke more life into the situation than I did. But once I finally came to my senses, once I finally realized that I was really in the wrong while the actions and the things I was saying, I made correction. And that's when everything started to fall more in place.
Right. And the other important part of monitoring what you say, it's also not what you say, but it's your nonverbals. Nonverbals can be to me, can be more powerful than what you're actually saying, because we could say one thing out of our mouth, but our demeanor, the way we're saying it, our facial expressions, all those things tell the truth. So you can say it out of your mouth, but most of the time people can really tell if you mean it. And why, another important reason why it's important that you monitor what you're saying is there are little ears that are listening and they're watching. And people always say, don't do as I say, do as what they say, don't do as I
say, do as I do.
Right. Don't do what I do what I say.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's like, so what type of example, because we're only here for a little while, right? We all got our time before we're here, and then we're gone, but then our children are left here. Right? And then they're going to have a family. So the way we have to change our mindset is that the next generation is watching what you do, and they will then take that as, well, if mommy and daddy handled a situation like this, this must be the way that it has to, this is the way things should occur. Right? Because I saw my mommy and daddy, and they did it this way. And so if they did it this way, because children trust their parents, then they then take that into their relationship. And it may not be until they're older and they come into their own life experiences that they try to unlearn the detriment that they were exposed to. Now, some of them will be able to do it, and some of them, unfortunately, won't. And now you have set the stage and the pattern. You have given them, like we talked about last week, you have given them the example on how to solve problems. So if you are talking about a person behind their back, then you just taught your children how to talk about somebody behind their back. You say one thing, and then when they leave, you say something else. So now you've taught them that that's okay to do, because again, you mommy and daddy, you are the example, right?
Right.
So exactly. No negative talk. That's why it's important. It's not to say that you're going to be in agreement with everything, or that you guys cannot have a disagreement, but keep it behind the scenes so that children don't hear what you're saying, about that, person. You know what I mean? It's not to say that you can't never say anything about the other co-parent, because maybe, they did do something foolish, but you don't even like, man, that was dumb. Or you didn't like something that they purchased. Like we've done that before, and we had to catch ourselves. Like, why did you buy that? Like, he bought you that? Like, I had to catch myself because it's like, you don't need, like he didn't need to know that, right? So now that makes, what if your child actually liked it? Right? And now he bought you that burgundy shirt, or he bought you them blue shoes. You never wore shoes like that. Well, maybe he told the co-parent that he liked those type of shoes, but you keep buying him the shoes you want him to wear. Right? So again, we gotta be careful what we say and what we do in front of our children, because they're watching. And don't think that when we're saying children, we're not just talking about the 4 and 5 year olds or the preschoolers or the elementary. We're talking about even the teenagers, right? Because now they're getting older and they're easily persuaded. And, and if they think that the other parent, they're not really getting along with you or the co-parent, you giving them fuel, right? My mom don't even like this stuff anyway. Right? You're not helping the situation. You're really adding fuel to the fire. So please, please, please monitor what you say. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, and actually, also when you're monitoring your conversation about the co-parent or monitoring your conversation with the co-parent. So say, for instance, there are going to come times where you're going to have to actually sit down or maybe over the phone. You're going to have to talk with the co-parent. Now, to ensure that the conversation is productive and to make sure that everyone's voice is heard, please limit the negative comments. Because what is the best way you could turn a person off or you could put a person in defensive mode is to start talking negative about the person. Because naturally when someone is talking about you, you raise your defenses. You're raising you're basically ready to fight at that moment. So basically when you're having these conversations, think of the bigger picture. What problem are we really trying to solve that required all of us to come together and discuss wherever the issue is or discuss wherever we need to do moving forward. And it takes a lot of maturity to do that. And it takes a lot of work to get to the point of having productive conversations. I remember we said a couple times, sometimes it's okay to agree to disagree. That might be the outcome of your conversation. But as long as both parties can agree that, hey, we're just going to agree to disagree, we can't come to a resolution about this, that's fine. Because both people, you can still walk away, and guess what? You can still communicate concerning, okay, when's the next pickup time? When's the next thing? When's the next event? Hey, what needs to be done? What do I need to get? How can I help? You can still have those conversations even though you had a disagreement. So always keep things on a positive level. The best you can. You can. We
ain't in the fairy. We ain't in Disney World. We know that everybody doesn't. It's not always a happy ever after, right? Where everybody's just gonna come together and start dancing in the middle of Times Square. Right? We know that. But the things that we can control, we need to control. And a lot of times it's just letting things go. Right? And so the last thing this will help a lot too. The last point, number 5, is listen more than you talk. Listen more than you talk. Now, I like Beyonce, right? And the first thing I thought about was the song. One of the songs, she has a song called Listen, right? You got to listen to what the other person is saying and not hear what you want to hear, or you already cut them off in your mind and you're not even listening to them because you're already ready to come back with your opinion on what they said. So you ain't even really heard anything that they said.
Yeah, truly listening is a art form because there's a difference between listening and hearing. I know for a while, for a period of time, I was hearing Sanita, but I wasn't actually listening to her. So there would be bits and pieces that I would hear, and I would take those bits and pieces and say, okay, this is the conclusion she's coming with. And if I actually listened to what she was saying, I would realize I was in far left field of what she was actually saying, and this is what she actually meant. So when you're listening, that means you're fully attentive to that person or persons. That means you are fully engaged with them.
Right.
That means that you're not, okay, the person is talking and you're not on your phone texting someone, or you're looking on Facebook, or you're looking at a video or something on your phone, or you're looking at TV while, your spouse or your children are talking to you and saying something. You're just basically saying, I don't value what you're saying.
Ooh, that is so good. I'm sorry.
That's really in essence so what you're saying. I don't value what you're saying. It's not worth my time and energy. So, but this TV show is worth my time. It is valuable to me because I'm paying attention. I'm listening to what's being said on TV. So you don't ever want to put your spouse, you don't ever want to put your children in that type of situation because guess what? The more you stop listening to what they're saying, they will shut you out, especially your children. And you'll wonder when they get older, why do my children not talk to me? Why did they not say anything to me? Well, because you planted the seed when they actually were talking to you and when they were telling you things that was going on in their lives, and you just closed them out.
Right. Or you rushed them.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you know, prime example, Toney used to be like, oh my God, that used to get on my nerve, and he'd be like, well, could you just hurry up? Like, I'm like, I didn't know I was on a time constraint, right? I'm up here trying to tell you stuff. Now, I know that sometimes as women, we can be a little long-winded. We can go through all, you know, tell you what color the car was when we drove and when we went down the aisle, what we were looking at. I know that sometimes we can go through, give you lots of details, right? And lots of details. But he would just be like, you know, he'll be like, you know, and we joke, and I knew what it meant because we would joke about it like at different things, right? And so when he did it to me, but not just once, but a couple of times, it was like, speed it up, like, come on, hurry up, you know. All right, so what you want me to do? Or just cut me off. It was just kind of like, well, I don't want to talk to you then. You know what I mean? So again, it just makes you be like, well, golly, now I got to try to feel like I told him, I don't want to feel like I'm at work. Like, I got to talk to you like you know, he does a lot of briefings at work. So I feel like I needed to brief him. You know what I mean? It's like, I got to give you the high level. Like, I'm your wife. I'm not the executive of, you know, in your department. Like, I don't, you know, I got 15 minutes of your time before you done checked out on me, you know? And so that's hurtful, you know, when somebody's like, speed it up, you know, or you taking too long to get to your point. And it's just like, well, I won't talk to you. Or I end up leaving out important information or details that he needed because what did he do? He ended up asking me questions. But those would have been possibly questions that he wouldn't have had to ask if he would have just let me talk and made me feel like it's okay. Right? So we had a few questions. Darwin asked me, men or women. We just talking about in general. Everybody needs to listen more than they talk because, again, if he's rushing me, how engaged was he? Right? How engaged was he into what I was saying if he was rushing me? Right? Because he already like, oh, I already know how to solve that. And I may not even need him to solve anything. Right?
Right. And then, too, you know, for some men, it's a big deal when some men actually open up and do start expressing themselves, start communicating, hey, this is how I'm actually feeling. And when a man does that and he's really starting to open his heart and really communicate, because some men just don't do it, then you have to be really attentive to what is happening because you never know when that next opportunity is going to come up when he opens up to you. So spouses, wives, when that man, you know, that internalizes everything and then all of a sudden he says, hey, I need to talk, I need to get some things off of my chest, that's your moment to just sit there and let that man talk.
Yes. And I love this other comment from Reverend Wallace. She said it's so important to have productive conversations as much as possible and listen more. She said God made 2 ears and 1 mouth. Thank you, Lord. She thanked us for using us, thanking the Lord for using us. But that's true. He gave us 2 ears so that we would listen more than we talk. Right? If he wanted us to talk more, he probably gave us 2 mouths and 1 ear, right? We need to listen. So I like what you said about being intentional and being engaged. Put those phones down. What did we do before the cell phone, the iPads, and the MacBooks, right? It's like in social media. You got to cut that stuff off and just engage. When was the last time your family sat down at the dinner table and you know, we had to tell our boys, you know, because they were older, put the phones away, you know. Right. Like, don't come to the table. And that older one, he's slick. He'd be like, you know, scrolling, be under the paper towel. Like, we got to pull back away from this stuff, because these are the things that enable us the ability to communicate with each other, because we're not engaged with one another. I mean, we're texting. Like, I know I could be real lazy and text my teenager, could you come downstairs? Could you come downstairs and get, like, it's convenient, but let's not let the technology overtake the relationship. That you can't even talk. Like, if the only time your spouse can hear you say you love them is because you got I love you and then the little heart emoticon. Like, you gotta be able to express these things in communication with your spouse without the technology, right? Right. So we've given you 5 ways to enhance your communication, right? And one was to include your spouse in all communications. Ensure that, number 2 is ensure that your spouse is never caught off guard. 3, establish clear, defined boundaries. And number 4, monitor the conversation with the co-parents. No negative talk. And number 5, listen more than you talk. You will learn so much more if you just be quiet.
Yes.
Right? Just be quiet and just really listen to the heart. You will pick up on what the heart of the person is saying to you. And sometimes it's not easy, because I'm not saying that everything that's being said is kumbaya, I love you and oh, you the world. Sometimes it's, you hurt me. And I didn't like when you did that. And sometimes it's, you need to do better. The way you talk to that person, that co-parent, was rude and obnoxious. And so you really need to check yourself, right? And sometimes we don't want to hear that conversation. So we have to be able to listen and say, hey, maybe I do need to do a little self-evaluation. And then let's just give them real quick tips on, say you're not doing any of these things. One thing you can do is, don't beat yourself up. As Toney mentioned, was these things take time. There is no one solution, one size fits all. It's like, take your time. Some families take years. Some, hey, they nip this in the bud real easy. So don't compare yourself. That would be number 2. Don't compare yourself. Don't compare yourself to another person, right? So.
And then number 3, just be intentional about, okay, just like you mentioned, don't beat yourself up if you're not communicating at the level you think you should be. Number 2, don't compare yourself to others. And then be intentional about reversing the where you're at right now to where you want to be. Be intentional about it. That means really putting in an effort organically and lovingly, trying to fix the communication gap. If it's with your spouse, be intentional about it. Say, you know what? We're just going to spend some time. We're going to go off somewhere. We're just going to sit somewhere and just talk.
Right.
It's no rhyme or reason about, we're just going to talk, just conversate. And you'll find out just talking to each other will help to open up some other things that you might have not known, or some stressors that your spouse might be going through that's causing the lack in communication. Right. Being intentional with your children. Hey, your child, it's so many things that these children today are going through. I mean, you have the social media bullying. We got bullying in schools. You got all these different things they're exposed to every single day. So the level of pressure that is placed upon these children from your early age all the way to young adults is tremendous. So be intentional about communicating with them. If there's another gap in the communication and you're not communicating as much as you should, start taking small bits and chunks of it and then build upon that.
Right. And just like Ms. Montague was saying, open up your mouth and talk. Like, that is so important, because a lot of times we think that we're in a marriage, we're in a relationship, and that they should just know. A lot of times she should know. Like, we talked about this when we were, we were dating. Well, you're married for like 30 years now, or you're married for 20 years, and the last time you talked about that particular issue may have been years ago. So sometimes you may have to revisit some things, and yes, you may have to remind people. Don't always say, oh, that person should know, because it's up to you to make sure that they know. And of course, it's up to them to remember some of the stuff. But like if you've talked about something many moons ago, it may, they may not remember. So sometimes that's why we have to communicate. We have to remind people of what may be bothering us, right? So, and then communication and opening up your mouth and talking may also mean that you may have to, the last thing is, don't be afraid to go speak to someone else. Like so many marriages, and I'm just talking about marriages right now, we isolate ourselves when we go through problems that often stem from communication. Reach out. Again, we talked about this last week about community. Who is in your community that is holding you accountable? Who in your community can you go to? Who is that mentor? For those of you who go to church, are you going to your marriage ministry and talking to your marriage ministry leaders? Are you, and if you feel like you can't talk to them, at least you can ask them, hey, do you have a counselor? You don't have to say, hey, man, my spouse, if you don't feel comfortable and you don't feel comfortable with talking to them, but I'm sure that they may have some sort of resources that you can go and ask them, hey, do you have any marriage counselors that you can recommend so I can give it to a friend? You know what I mean? So that if you're not comfortable with saying it's you, but reach out to those people. Those people are there to help you. They believe most marriage ministry folks, they are in love with marriage. They want you. It's not that they're imperfect people or that their marriages are all wonderful, but they are there to help you and to guide you and to help, so getting counseling, going to mentors, that is so very important. Well, we are at the very end of our segment for today of In the Mix with the Mitchells. And next week, you can catch us here every week. But next week, Toney, you want to tell them about what's occurring next week?
Yes. So next Thursday, mark it on your calendars, fellas, is just for the men, the husbands, the men in general. Is going to be all about us. So next week, tune in the Mix with the Mitchells. It's going to be me, and we're going to have some real talk for the brothers. So make sure you tune in next Thursday because I have a very exciting topic. We're going to build upon what we talked about for the past two in the Mix with the Mitchells, and we're going to look at that from a man's perspective.
Right, because husbands need a space where sometimes they can just come together and talk.
Yes.
Right, so thank you for joining us. Please like our Facebook page if you haven't already, our Instagram pages. Go to our website and sign up for our newsletter. We send out a newsletter once a month. And we just want to start engaging. There's a lot of things that we have planned for 2019, our meetups, where we're going to be getting together and we're going to reach out to our community because we can do more together, right? So we will see you guys this time next week, 9:15. Catch you next week for In the Mix with the Mitchells, where I'm Sanita Mitchell.
And I'm Toney Mitchell.
And we are the Perfect Family Blend, and we will see you next week.
All right. God bless. Good night.
Thank you guys for joining.